As the war rages on in Syria, more than 6 million civilians remain displaced just within the country itself. We checked in with Kevin Kennedy, the UN Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the crisis in Syria, to find out what the United Nations is doing to address those challenges, and also what he really thinks of U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to set up safe zones in Syria. Kevin, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I want to get straight into it. A recent report released by the United Nations shows more than 60,000 people have been displaced in and around Al-Bab. What are you guys seeing on the ground? What are the obstacles to getting humanitarian aid in there? How is the UN working to help these civilians?
Well, we support NGOs who work in Al-Bab. That's what we do. It's been a difficult area to get into because of the fighting, because of different groups and different political agendas. We, of course, don't really care if you're in a government area, a non-government area, a Kurdish area. We don't care. If you're a person in need, we will try to provide assistance in one way, shape, or form. I think the 60,000 displaced in Al-Bab, that's a sliver of what we face in Syria every day. The population of Syria is roughly about 18 million people inside the country, 5 million outside. Of those 18 million, over 6 million are displaced from their homes, and many 2, 3, 4 times over. So throughout all of Syria, north to south, east to west, we have these problems.
There have been a lot of areas in Al-Wa'ir, Homs City, eastern Ghouta, where civilians there have been under consistent siege by the regime. For months, the UN hasn't been able to get aid there. What's happening?
In all these areas, we try every month to reach them. Frankly, our batting average is pretty low. Blocked by all sides, primarily by the government of Syria, who actually surrounds most of these areas, but the opposition also surrounds several too, and also denies us access. We are able, on average, to we might ask for 20 convoys to these areas. We probably deliver 2, 3, or 4 to get through. Some it's for legitimate security problems, fighting is broken out, we can't deliver, but more often than not, we just don't get the green light to go to be able to do that.
Particularly talking about the efforts in Syria, U.S. President Donald Trump has proposed setting up safe zones, something that would be a departure from his predecessor, President Barack Obama, who worried that such a move would draw the United States further into the conflict. What is your assessment of safe zones in Syria, and is this optimistic that that the United States would have a president that would be willing to take more of a coordinated humanitarian effort within the country itself?
I don't know what U.S. policy is at all. I would just tell you what the Secretary General, the message he passed when he was in Turkey recently. In the UN's 7-year experience with safe zones, our experience has not been a good one. Okay, whether it's security, whether it's who controls it, whether there's no freedom of movement coming and going. I think people still bear in mind Srebrenica, where it was supposed to be a safe zone of some sorts, and 8,000 people lost their lives. So I guess it would depend how it's laid out. If you theoretically had an area that was totally secure, people could come and go, but then who watches who comes and goes? I mean, how does that work? Is there a no-fly zone overhead? Do humanitarians have access? Can people talk to people? I mean, there'd be a lot of things to consider, and safe zone is probably not the best term, and probably an area where aid can be delivered with lesser problems, We're always open to any opportunity for access that we don't have, but our experience with safe zones has not been a good one.
Russia and the regime had evacuated civilians in Aleppo. They were moved to Idlib along with many of the opposition fighting groups. What is happening with civilians in Idlib, and is there a concern, is the United Nations doing anything preemptively to protect them, particularly after the downing of this Syrian plane for which Arar al-Sham took responsibility for?
Well, we actually have major operations in Idlib government, mostly coming from Turkey. Actually, the biggest problem we're facing now in that region is the interfactional fighting among the different opposition forces, which is making life very difficult. And the more hardcore Islamist groups, as he says, we read the papers and reports, have gained the upper hand in some areas, and that's making our work there very, very difficult. So you have a big concentration now of internally displaced people in Idlib. And one question is, how many people can they support, can they sustain? And also from other areas around Damascus where agreement was reached to a ceasefire or a reconciliation agreement, they've also moved up to Idlib as well too. So it's become the big concentration of people who do not want to live in government-controlled areas.
Kevin Kennedy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.